Hi, so it's American politics and it's the president, and today we're going to look at the president and the rest of the executive, specifically where or indeed who are all the president's men. Now, that means we're going to look at cabinet, and we're going to observe that cabinet are all about politics and administration. We're going to look at ExOp, and ExOp is all about strategy and policy, and we're going to look at the federal bureaucracy, which is about, well, basically managing a monumental arseache. So, what are we going to do? We're going to look at the powers, we're going to look at the checks. The powers, the control of the federal bureaucracy, the use of executive orders, cabinet and appointment and patronage, and the checks, the federal obligations, blah, 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 and the ratification of appointments. Now, the real powers here that we're looking at are executive orders, you need to know about those, and appointment and patronage. Realistically, the federal bureaucracy is more of an obligation than a power. The power is the use of executive orders to control the federal bureaucracy, but they do have specific limits. When it comes to these two, it's all about ratification of those particular appointments. But hopefully that will become clearer as we go on. So, cabinet and the ExOp. Cabinet, administrative and management function. It's not where policy is made or decisions are reached. It's attended by the Vice President and the heads of the key government departments. Congress has full oversight of government departments. It is not the job that we have in the UK. In the UK, any politician will be aspiring to get onto cabinet because supreme executive authority in the UK is invested in the cabinet collectively. That is not the case in the United States. In the United States, supreme executive authority is invested in this man, possibly woman. We'll see what happens next year. So cabinet is a much diminished entity to the one that we know and love in the UK. ExOp, on the other hand, or the West Wing, performs a critical policy formulation role. There's no fixed membership, but really anyone in the executive office of the president is one of those key presidential advisors. Only a handful of them, sorry, only one or two actually, are subject to Senate ratification. So basically, the president can appoint to ExOp whoever he likes. And it tends to operate outside the public view. We don't generally know what's going on in ExOp because it's not part of the public administration. These are the president's personal advisors, and they are answerable to him and to him only. So, as we said, cabinet is all about implementing policy. They are high-profile public appointments. They sit in the public domain, but they are remote. They have inconsistent access to the POTUS. The POTUS will, President of the United States, in case you're wondering, the President will only ever speak to them if he has to, whereas ExOp are all about policy formulation. They live in the White House. They live behind the scenes in the White House. They have a very, very close working relationship with the President. So really, that's where the decisions get made. In which case then, what is cabinet actually for? It's administration. These are secretaries of state. They are responsible for a huge department under their administration. They need to be managerially competent. They need to be the public face of the executive, and that brings identity politics into play. Time after time we get a president saying they want their cabinet to look like America, and so you've got to have women represented, you've got to have ethnic minorities represented, and so on. There's got to be a diversity there that reflects the diversity of the United States. It's also all about politics. It's about healing party wounds. Now remember, when a president comes in, he'll have just been through, in addition to the election against the opposition party, they'll have been through a really, really nasty internal party selection process. And so often cabinet is used to heal wounds and bridge party divides, sometimes between parties as well as within parties, and indeed to reward service. The other thing that cabinet often does is that it works with Congress. Usually there are close links evident. Many cabinet secretaries will be lifted from Congress because every now and again the president, like it or not, has to deal with Congress. And indeed, remember, Congress has full oversight of the state departments. And so the secretaries of state who are responsible for those departments need to be able to work with Congress. So that's cabinet. What about ExOp? Well, this is about policy formulation. This is where the decisions are made. These are the advisors who help to shape presidential policy. They also manage the executive. They're gatekeepers to the president. You can't get to the president except through his chief of staff. Chief of staff is the primary gatekeeper, probably the single most important office within the executive offices of the president. They manage the president. So if you want to get to the president, you go through the West Wing. They also manage the message. They ensure that the president's message is conveyed clearly and consistently, and so you have a huge raft of media advisors, spokesmen, and so on and so forth. And their job is to make sure that the president's message is getting across, everybody understands it, and there's no doubt as to where the president is going, what executive policy is. That is a very, very important role of ExOp. So, here we go. The vice president is Joe Biden. He was formerly a Delaware senator. Hey, you can read this yourselves. It's nothing new. What I'd like you to do as these things are going up, do check, because I'm just looking at this and I'm thinking some bits of this are slightly out of date. I know there's a couple of places here that have been replaced, a couple of positions here that have been replaced. Can you please check? And then we'll discuss those in class. So here's the executive. We've got cabinet, policy administration and implementation, and we've got ExOp who are there managing policy. So the big difference here is that one of these operates in the public domain, the other one operates behind closed doors in those smoke-filled rooms that people can't really see. Cabinet is under constant scrutiny. They're under scrutiny from Congress, from the party, from the people. And that's why all of the appointments then need to be politically sensitive. They need to be politically correct. In ExOp, the president can post pretty much whoever he wants. So the big difference there. Congress is watching cabinet, the party is watching cabinet, and of course the people are watching cabinet. But nobody gets to see what's happening inside the West Wing. So, we do have an exception that proves the rule, and I'm going to talk about that right now. The Bush administration was managed very, very carefully by a central cabal of what we would call neoconservatives. Look at all those cabinet positions. None of them came from Congress. That's really quite significant. And bear in mind that over time these positions all changed, but these were the key ones. The key figures here that you need to know about really are these ones. Dick Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Ashcroft, Card, Rove, Rice, Hughes, and Fleischer. What we had here was a network of influence. And between these two organizations, between Cabinet and between ExOp, the Bush administration was largely steered from the back seat. This is the exception that proves the rule. Under Bush, the Cabinet was surprisingly important, and none more so than this man here, Dick Cheney. Again, when we come to look at the president and the vice president, Dick Cheney just tossed away the rule book and steered the whole administration from the back. Normally, we would say that cabinet is in a much diminished role and all the big decisions are made in ExOp. The Bush administration, Bush 43 administration, was very, very different. In Bush 43 administration, cabinet had a critical role to play. That role under Obama is profoundly diminished. Now, here is another case study. When Obama came in, he wanted to make Susan Rice Secretary of State. Now, this is probably the highest profile role in cabinet. It is what they would call their foreign secretary. However, the Senate made it abundantly clear that they did not rate Miss Rice at all. She had been in charge of the Libyan policy when the balloon went up, and she didn't handle it particularly well. Instead, she became the National Security Advisor. Now, the National Security Advisor lives in ExOp and is probably the second most important position within that. So she became ExOp instead. Hillary Clinton was offered Secretary of State instead as a consolation prize for coming second in the primaries, and she took it because there was nothing else on the table at the time. And it made sense to try to heal those wounds within the Democratic Party created by a really, really very, very bitter primary contest. So we had party unity, female appeal, and of course she brought a certain gravitas to the position. In spite of the fact that she wasn't perhaps the most experienced senator on the block, she still, or the most experienced politician on the block, having been Bill Clinton's wife, she did bring a little bit of gravitas to the system. So again, we come back to this thing, cabinet, political appointments. These are all means to particular ends, okay? They're not there for their intrinsic advice. The advice goes into ExOp. These are the people the president really wants about him, offering defense and advice. And again, key point, they do not really require Senate ratification. So that's ExOp, and that's the cabinet. Let's talk a little bit about the federal bureaucracy. This is also known as, well, we would call it the civil service. In America, they call it foggy bottom because that's where it is in Washington. It's a hollow. Washington, by the way, in case you haven't worked it out, is just one monumental swamp. And foggy bottom is one bit of that. So the federal bureaucracy. There's a link there that you can follow, but it's analogous to our UK civil service. There's Treasury, State Department, Interior, Defense, Homeland Security, and so on and so forth. About 500 departments, 2.7 million civilian employees. Now, 500 departments, obviously, not each of those has a Secretary of State. The Secretaries of State attending Cabinet, about 24. Here's one such example. This is the Department of Defense, and what we've got here, these are the all of these agencies here. These are the only sort of military aspect. All of these lot down here are civilians. These will all be civilian contractors within here, not necessarily military personnel. But you get some sort of idea as to how vast these organizations can be. Now, we've talked about the Secretaries of State. They are appointed by the President and they are ratified by the Senate. The key thing that comes to the federal bureaucracy are these things called executive orders. Now, these are instructions to the federal bureaucracy describing the internal organization and the promulgation of congressional law. Here are some key points, two key points really, about the executive orders. They are not law. Just like secondary legislation in the UK, they are subordinate to real law. And they have a limited range. They only apply to the federal bureaucracy. Now, here are a few key executive orders that we've had in recent time. And we will discuss those in class. If you can do a little bit of background on some of those, pick one or two, and we can have a look at them. To be honest, they're not massively exciting, apart from this one perhaps, and this one. This one everyone went crazy about last year, and there's a very, very funny video on StoneNet going into the executive orders on immigration policy. Evaluating executive orders, good things. Well, they allow for decisive action. They have a massive range of influences. They apply across the entire executive branch and federal bureaucracy. You remember that's 500 departments, 2.7 million people. But there's no guarantee that they're going to work. There's no guarantee that they're actually going to do the job that the president hopes. And of course, they have a finite range. It might be 2.7 million people, but they don't apply to General Motors. They don't apply to McDonald's. They don't apply to anyone who doesn't draw their check from the federal government. And they can be overturned fairly easily. Congress can legislate over the top of them, and future presidents can actually reverse them. The Supreme Court can also declare them unconstitutional. So really, while they're good, they have certain limitations. That's what we're going to go to next lesson. I look forward to discussing them with you. But next episode up here is going to be the President of Congress. We'll talk about that very, very soon.